The following video is brought to you by YouTube. It's like TikTok with more pedophiles. Every hero needs a good rival, and Sonic has no shortage of them. You got Metal Sonic, Knuckles, Jet, Sega of America, but none are more iconic than Shadow the Hedgehog. And for good reason. Shadow is awesome. He's got a great design, cool abilities, and a dark past. But like a lot of the Sonic cast nowadays, Shadow isn't really himself anymore. He went from a deep and compelling anti-hero to a bland, soulless archetype. So what led to Shadow's fall from grace? Well, second fall from grace. Haha, let's find out. Shadow exploded onto the scene in Sonic Adventure 2, and to say that he left an impact would be an understatement. Shadow was unlike anything the series had tackled up to that point. Sonic never shied away from darker elements, but Shadow was on a whole other level. Like shooting a little girl kind of other level.
Maria!
Shadow was created by Professor Gerald Robotnik on the Space Colony Ark, as a means to cure his granddaughter Maria, who was suffering from Neuroimmunodeficiency Syndrome, or NIDS for short. Shadow and Maria quickly became friends, and they both hoped to one day see the world. But after the government found out what Gerald was up to, they raided the Ark, destroyed his research, and killed everyone on board, including poor Maria, who sacrificed herself to save Shadow. Gerald was captured by the government and forced to continue his research on Shadow to turn him into a weapon, which jolly old Gerald was fine with since the death of his granddaughter sent him off his bloody rocker. So Gerald altered Shadow's memories and instructed him to exact revenge on the human race, and was then executed via firing squad. I'm not joking.
Come on!
In the beginning, Shadow's goal was to fulfill Maria's wish, or at least what he thought was her wish, that being to destroy the world. However, we see firsthand that that's not who Shadow really is. Shadow is a loner. He's stoic, he's cold, but he's also ruthless and cunning, willing to do whatever it takes to achieve his goal. He prides himself on being the ultimate life form, and he has the skills to back it up. But underneath his cold exterior, Shadow is a deeply conflicted person. Despite being a villain for most of SA2, he still goes out of his way to save Rouge on Prison Island. He shows respect for Sonic during their final battle, and he still holds on to his memories of Maria. He's clearly not some one-note bad guy. Then at the end of the game, undisputed greatest of all time Amy Rose manages to get through to him and helps him remember what Maria really wanted, for him to protect the planet she loved. Shadow finally understands his purpose and sacrifices himself to save the world. Shadow's story in SA2 is one of tragedy. Shadow was always pure of heart, he was always a good person, but he was taken advantage of, brainwashed and manipulated for the sake of revenge. And the only way for him to fix Gerald's mistake was to give up his own life. Until they brought him back. Yeah, it turns out Shadow was so popular that Sonic Team brought him right back from the dead in Sonic Heroes, and even gave him his own game a few years later. This marked a turning point for Shadow since he's suffering with amnesia throughout both games. Now you could make the argument that this cheapens Shadow's sacrifice in SA2, but I'm not sure I agree. Shadow is a character tied to his past, so wiping the slate clean and having him confront that past was a good direction to take him. Shadow's no longer following orders or carrying out someone else's plan, he's searching for his own answers. And by the end of Shadow the Hedgehog, he moves on from his past and carves his own path. That doesn't mean he doesn't care about his past, or Maria, or Gerald. It just doesn't define him anymore. He doesn't live to fulfill Maria's promise, but he was influenced by a love of the planet enough to dedicate himself to protecting it. This carries over to Sonic 06, where Shadow is working for Gun. Now the core of Shadow is still the same. He's still dark, brooding and edgy, but now he has a clear sense of identity. Shadow knows who he is and what he fights for. When he has a goal, he'll see it through no matter what, by any means necessary. He's not being manipulated anymore, he does what he wants and fights for what he thinks is right. Shadow's story in 06 is fantastic because it challenges his arc from the last two games. Shadow is told directly by Mephiles that humanity will turn on him in the future. His efforts in protecting the planet will be pointless because he'll still be punished in the end. But Mephiles can't manipulate him. No one can. Because Shadow has already accepted who he is, even if the world can't.
That's absurd. Whatever it is you want to do, you can do it alone.
You forgive humanity this folly, then?
I determine my own destiny.
But even then, when he finds out that Omega is the one who'll seal him away in the future, it actually kinda gets to him. But Rouge, being the absolute baddie that she is, reminds Shadow that she'd never abandon him.
Shadow? Even if you believe everyone in the world will be against you, know that I'll always remain by your side. Remember that.
I will.
This culminates in the final confrontation with Mephiles, which, well, you all know how it goes.
Why fight at all? Why risk your life for those who will persecute you later?
If the world chooses to become my enemy, I will fight like I always have.
This is Shadow. After everything he's gone through, all the pain, all the suffering, finally free from his past, he stays true to himself and fights for what he believes in. And then, say it with me, the 2010s happened. You all know the drill. In the 2010s, Sega took the series in a new direction to aim towards younger audiences, resulting in the stories and characters being significantly watered down and flanderized. And while I've gone on about how much I hate what they did to Sonic and Amy, I think Shadow got it the worst. Shadow is now the rival. His personality is mean. His entire arc was dropped in favor of making him a joke. People like to compare him to Vegeta from Dragon Ball, but honestly, that's an insult to Vegeta. Don't get me wrong, Vegeta definitely regressed in a lot of ways too, but at least he's still one of the good guys. At least he still fights for his wife and his family. At least they gave him something outside of being the rival. Shadow went from an intelligent, confident anti-hero to a prideful, egotistical moron. He may not have been in a lot of games around that time, but the intent was clear. The Shadow we knew was gone. The only game in the 2010s that actually got Shadow right was Forces of all things. Episode Shadow has some genuinely good characterization. It's nothing spectacular, but it's Forces, it gets credit for trying. But Shadow also made multiple appearances in IDW, and, oh, no. Let's talk about mandates. Yes, they exist. Everything has mandates. How strict are they in regards to Sonic? We don't know. However, restrictions exist for a reason. It's to keep things on brand and authentic. With that said, I don't think mandates are a good excuse for poor writing. It doesn't really matter how strict the mandates are, it's up to the writer to work around them. I bring this up because it's been stated by multiple writers on the IDW team that Shadow specifically has the most restrictions in regards to how he's portrayed. I have no reason not to believe that. I'm not a writer and I don't know the first thing about what it's like to write for a franchise like Sonic. What bothers me are the moments that weren't mandated by Sega. Shadow getting infected with the Zombot virus by being an arrogant idiot is stupid and out of character. But this wasn't a mandate Sega forced onto the writing team, it was always part of the plan, and that's what I find so concerning.
The whole point of Shadow's story, even though it didn't come out quite how I wanted, was to amp up the sense of doom and hopelessness. That's the running theme of the Zombot arc, is things get progressively worse. And Shadow is such an overpowered character that if he is removed from the fight, if he is removed as a possible way out, that's one less option the heroes have.
What's even more confusing is how inconsistent Shadow's writing is depending on who's at the helm. Ian Flynn's Shadow is different from Evan Stanley's Shadow, which is different from Ian Muchler's Shadow. So where do the writers end and the mandates begin? Now normally I'd say there's nothing wrong with different writers coming in and offering their own take on these characters, like in the Archie comics for instance. The problem is that Archie was always its own thing. IDW is canon. These are supposed to be the characters from the games, but I just don't buy it. The reason this is so frustrating is because this problem doesn't exist in Japan. Sonic and his friends have been consistent since the beginning, but for some reason the western side of the franchise can't make up its mind and characters like Shadow are suffering for it. In the West, Shadow is just the rival, and that's it. His dynamic with Sonic has been reduced to childish bickering when that was never the case. They say they're polar opposites and they can barely stay in the same room with each other, but that just isn't true.
I don't know, buddy. We never really got along.
From the moment we met, we've been at odds. We're polar opposites.
Sonic and Shadow aren't rivals because they're so different, it's because they're so similar. Both of them live by their own rules. They'll both fight for what they think is right, even if others don't agree, and they don't care about being seen as a hero or a villain. The reason they butt heads is because of their personalities. Shadow is very goal-oriented. When he has a mission, he'll see it through no matter what and bulldoze anything in his way. Sonic is more laid back and unpredictable. He doesn't mind straying off the path and having some fun or helping someone out. Shadow sticks to his path and Sonic goes with the flow. They're not opposites, they're two sides of the same coin. So, where does Shadow go now? Honestly, it's hard to say. Shadow Generations is looking promising, but it's still too early to tell if the game's story will stay true to Shadow without undoing his arc or relying too much on #knowing smiles. He's making his big screen debut in Sonic 3, which will introduce him to a whole new generation of Sonic fans. He's even got his own year dedicated to him. Shadow is always going to be an important part of the series, but the lack of synergy between Sega of America and Sega of Japan is damaging these characters. These characters struck a chord with people for a reason. We didn't fall in love with Sonic because he was a wholesome, squeaky clean Boy Scout. We didn't connect with Amy because she wasn't a damsel in distress. And we didn't sympathise with Shadow because he was a grouchy old man. The original intent behind these characters are important and shouldn't be disregarded just because it doesn't line up with your personal headcanons. It's fine to have those headcanons, but blurring the line between canon and headcanon does more harm than good. So, will Shadow ever get back on track? Well, I certainly hope so. Shadow's story of redemption and identity is important and more relevant than ever. Shadow taught us to stay true to ourselves and to carve our own path, to let go of the past and fight for what we think is right. This isn't the first time Shadow lost his identity. Let's just hope he finds it again soon.